Right.
So we can. So I'm Adam Rosa. I'm with Collabo Planning and Design. So we are, as Andrea mentioned, we're the planning coordinators. I've been working with the West Ward community for a few years now. We started on the neighborhood plan, I believe in 2018 or so. And it's kind of rolled in and transitioned into this choice neighborhood planning grant, which we're now about 14 months into the process. So again, thank you all for being here. I'll pass it over to Amy.
Hi, everybody. Amy Bacadoro, manager of the West Ward Community Initiative and West Ward resident. And I'll pass it to Tanya.
Hi everyone, my name is Tanya Ruiz. I'm the assistant manager to the West Ward Community Initiative, and I'm also a West Ward resident. I'm excited to be here. Thanks.
Anyone else wants to introduce themselves?
I'm David O'Connell. I'm a member of Easton City Council. And I've just been working with Amy and others on West Ward development and improvement. And I will pass it on to Bob Freeman.
Okay, thanks, David. Bob Freeman, state representative representing the Easton area in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. Grew up in the West Ward, spent most of my life there. My wife and I now live on College Hill, but I still have the family home, which I rent out to my brother and another tenant in the West Ward. And very devoted to seeing the West Ward stabilize and become the kind of great neighborhood I remember growing up as a kid. So happy to be here again as we continue our work.
Thank you, Luis.
I'll take a shot at it. My name is Louis Allegra. My connection with Easton is I am a volunteer mentor with Squirrel Lehigh Valley. And we began mentoring in Easton, courtesy of Amy and Kim at Easton Main Street Initiative. We'd spend 1 day a week there. This is all pre-COVID, by the way, 5 years ago. And I think John Kingsley is in the group. I don't know if John, if you're on the call, but the second day of the week that we mentored in Easton was a room that he provided in City Hall. So for 2 years we did that. Then the pandemic came along, and all of our mentoring now is virtual. If you're not familiar with SCORE, it stands for Service Corps of Retired Executives. It's a 50-plus-year-old nationwide organization. There are about 11,000 volunteer mentors all across the country. And our mission is to mentor individuals who think they might want to start a business, to individuals who, yeah, I'm going to start a business, just don't know how or need some help. And we help them launch. We help them with business planning, first of all. We help them launch. Then we help them grow, might help them scale. And our tagline is for the life of your business. So that means when it comes time to sell or close your business, we can help you there as well. There's a lot more I could tell you, but I'm going to pass it on.
Thank you so much, Luis. Great having you. Next, we have Rajika.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rajika Reed. I am the Vice President for Community Health at St. Luke's University Health Network. And we have a hospital in Easton and serve the residents of the Easton community. And we conduct community health needs assessments every 3 years. And there's a lot of needs that, you know, we definitely see in the community, and love working in partnership with people in the community to address those needs. So thank you for having me on this call.
Thanks, Rajika. Sorry, I said your name wrong the first time. Next, we have Paul.
Hi, I'm Paul Brunswick with President of Two Rivers Health and Wellness Foundation. We're located at 11th and Northampton Street, right? Our parking lot backs up to Cottingham Stadium. And I started my day with the health and safety group this morning. So we're going to go again this afternoon.
You're on a roll. We're great. It's great to have you, Paul. Thank you. Next, we have Laura. And you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm Laura Fay. I've lived in Easton for about 5 years. Also owned a business downtown for about 5 years, and it was excited to see like downtown sort of grow business wise, and I'm just hoping to help move it up into West Ward too. Thanks.
Great having you. And last but not least, Julie.
Thank you. I'm a resident of the West Ward, and I think I'm interested in helping to find ways to support local entrepreneurs. I can't say the word today. Succeed in business, and I've seen a lot of storefronts open and close in the West Ward, so just interested in addressing that issue.
Absolutely. Thanks, Julie. It's so great to have such an engaged and such a core group of participants. I am so excited to see council members, representatives, as well as business owners and residents and mentors. Like, thank you so much, because you guys are part of what is going to make this project successful. We are very lucky to have your participation. And just before we get started, why don't we review briefly some of the things that we said or that we talked about on our last meeting. So I'm going to share my screen. How does that look? You guys remember that on the National Night Out, there was an event at Paxinosa. It was like a party, and we were there out there on a couple tables. We were talking about the neighborhood choice plan, and we had an artist on site, and she drew a huge drawing, like this big. And that was a visioning exercise. We were taking input from all of the residents that attended the event, and we were asking them, what does your community, what do you want your community to look like? Or what are some things that you would like to have in your community, right? So we divided the vision into 5 sections: 1, housing and business, another one, transportation and open space, community health and safety, equity and inclusion, and art, history, and culture. All of these are color coded, as you can see. And today we are only going to focus on the red one, which is housing and business section that we talked about from that night in October to our last working group meeting, where we all of the ideas that we were just like brainstorming, I put them on these little yellow sticky notes, and we just want to expand, and we want to identify which are the best ones, or the more plausible ones, or the ones that have most support or resonate the most with everyone, so that then we can ground them in like the current situation and the current environment that we have in Easton, and then we try to see how do we make it happen, right? So we had hundreds of ideas, literally, and I'm just gonna glance over a couple before we head to an online survey. On the online survey, we're gonna talk about the ones that resonated the most, and then I'm gonna ask you guys to rank them, and then we continue the conversation based on like, why did you choose that one as opposed to the other one? How do you think that it can benefit, or how do you think that it can be applied? And we go from there, okay? So just for a review regarding housing and business, we talked about centralizing information resources. We talked about people losing opportunities for affordable housing. We talked about the transportation challenge that seems to be a recurring theme across all of the themes that we're discussing, right? We want homeowners education and assistance. Tenants are missing out on opportunities for home ownership. How do we encourage current residents into taking advantage for home ownership opportunities? We want to see the city invested in this initiative. We want to see the city's interest in this initiative, and we want their support. There were questions about how does HUD manage the database of their tenants and their properties. how do we include landlords in this conversation about housing and businesses? Folks say that the city has done really great in the past, and we want to continue building on the existing legacy of housing opportunities. There's always a problem of parking. We talked about examples in Philadelphia, for example. There's the Jumpstart Germantown program, which is homeownership education program. We talked about partnerships with the SBDC and SCORE. So this is why we are so happy to have you today with us, Luis. We also talked about institutions like Rising Tide is a CDFI located in Bethlehem that perhaps can become a lending partner when we are talking about housing opportunities. Obviously, there's the threat and there's the shadow of gentrification and everything that is related to housing and development, right? We talked about bringing small business training to residents, storefront improvement programs, digital literacy and career training for residents as well, and feelings about it. It feels that, or a quote from a resident saying that they feel that they are never going to be able to get out of what their current situation where they're living in, perhaps, and feelings of like something is missing. So we also have some encouraging quotes about embracing the possibility and acknowledging that housing and business opportunities are very, very much needed in the community. And also home and maintenance supports program, and perhaps an idea of launching a affordability task force. Do you guys have additional ideas that you would like to add to this board before we get started? I see some comments in the chat. Maybe I am going really fast. Okay, some fellow members of this group couldn't make it today, but they actually took the survey ahead. So why don't I launch the survey? Can you guys see my screen? Yes? Okay, great. So if you go to menti.com, and I am gonna write it on the chat in just 1 second. Menti.com, and then you enter the code 69619157. It will bring you to this board of questions. Okay, so these are the questions that these were the options that resonated the most from all of the post-it notes that we read. So the initial strategies that we identified were expanding deconversion grant program. So for example, it's a program where rental homes become ownership homes. We talked about home improvement grants or contests and award programs for home improvements. We talked about homeowners education, initial housing reinvestment around the housing authority on North Union and Bushkill site. We talked about landlord training, including expanding Section 8. We talked about initial housing reinvestment on Elm Street, the landlord database and ranking program, a model block program, which is an integrated comprehensive approach, working about 1 block at a time. There is an option for parking innovation and improvement, and also encouraging development and services by faith-based organization. If this is too small, let me see if I can make it bigger. How does this look now?
Looks good.
Better. Sorry about that. So if you go on the link that Adam put on the chat, you can access the questions and then you can just order your priorities. Which one do you think is gonna be more impactful, or is there one that you prefer more? So we can take 5-ish minutes for everyone to submit their answers, and then we will open the conversation again.
Andrea, forgive me, I'm not sure how to access the polling. How do I do that?
There's a link on the chat. Do you see it, Bob?
Let me see.
Yeah, it's denying us access.
I see where Adam sent the link. Do I just go to that?
Yes. Hopefully that works. Please keep me posted. Otherwise, I'll send you a new invite.
Yeah, and the other way you can do it, so you can do it on your phone, separate from your screen. You can just type in, you see the website address at the top, menti.com, and then you put that code in. There's a couple different ways to access it.
Okay, I'm into the link that Adam sent, but I'm still not sure how I go about rating.
So there should be a drop-down menu on your screen where it says your first choice.
Okay,
When you click that, you'll see all 10 choices.
oh, I see, okay.
So you just kind of go one by one down the list, depending on your priority.
And since these have been sort of truncated, which is the one about deconversion, because it's not listed as such?
Expand deconversion grant program.
Oh, I see, it's at the bottom, okay. All right, and we're only supposed to pick one?
Nope, you're gonna order all 10.
Got you, sorry
But
about that.
you do it one at a time, from highest rank to lowest rank.
Okay, and then we go just to the next one, which is how you prioritize, got it.
Got it.
Thank you.
If you want to take a break before we go to the next one, then we want to talk about this one first. So let's give everyone a couple minutes. Why don't I open the mics again at 3:55? Right now it's 3:53. Does that sound reasonable? I mean, all of you guys can open your mics at any moment. And if this keeps giving you trouble, you can also engage with us on the chat.
Andrew, I have a question. The initial housing reinvestment around the Housing Authority's North Union Street, and then there's another one around the Elm Street. Could you define what you mean by initial housing reinvestment? Is that the sort of loci of the HUD grant that we're going to be replacing public housing, or is it other housing around that housing?
So those are the target sites that we have identified on the plan. So I see Adam is nodding.
Yeah, absolutely. So those would be the replacement of the public housing site, but in a mixed income setting. So we were just hoping to get a little bit of understanding from the group in terms of which priority we think is most important, which location.
Okay.
And Adam, that's along the lines of sort of what they did with Hope 6?
Exactly.
Oh, gotcha. Thank you.
Our plan will most likely have both locations, the Elm Street and the Union Street. That'll be all part of our housing strategy. But we really wanted to understand from the group if you think there's a strong preference for starting at North Union versus Elm Street or vice versa.
Gotcha. Thank you.
So we had 5 folks take the survey before we started this call. I want to give everyone a chance to submit their answers. Has everyone been able to use the survey, or do you guys need a little bit more time?
Just a little bit
just-
more time?
Yeah,
Absolutely,
just a little.
no rush.
Okay.
So while we're finishing up with the poll, I just wanted to let everybody know that we also have a market study that's underway, looking at residential uses in the West Ward. And we had a really nice debrief of the first phase of the market study from our consultant earlier this week, or was it last week? I'm losing track of time. But they're putting kind of the finishing polish on the report, and then we're hoping to send it out to this group as a reference and also have it on the website. So the first piece of the study will really focuses on the overall market and what they think the capacity can be for new housing. And then the second phase is going to be a much more targeted recommendations around our housing strategy, specifically around the housing authority properties. So that will all be coming in the next week or so, and we'll get it out to this group as soon as we have it finalized.
Thanks, Adam. All right, guys. So did everyone finish submitting their answers? All right. So it looks like the greatest preference that you guys gave was expanding the deconversion grant. It means transforming rental units into ownership units. The second place is home improvement grants, either by contest or like an award program. And the third place is the initial housing reinvestment around the North Union and the Bushkill side from the housing authority properties. Give me 1 second. I'm going to make note of this really quick. And meanwhile, who wants to go first and tell us why did you choose your answers as you did? Or if you disagree with this ranking, what would you put first?
I'll be happy to go. The funding for deconversion from rental to homeownership. I think one of the things about the history of the West Ward as it's transitioned over the years is that it went from a lot of home ownership into a lot of rental. And that was a variety of factors that contributed to that. The fact that people were moving out to the suburbs, they still had the property and they thought they'd use it as an investment property. And one of the things that did, there was less a sense of stake in the neighborhood, less a sense of ownership. That's not to say that people who rent don't care about their neighborhood. They do, they live there. But it didn't seem to produce the kind of and I think there's a good opportunity for that to be affordable for a lot of people. A lot of the homes in the West Ward, particularly along the alleyways like Spruce and Pine Street, are very modest. And if people are renting there but can convert into ownership, that gives them a stake in the neighborhood. It gives them home equity, and it enables them to stabilize the neighborhood overall. So that was the reason I chose that first.
Why do you think, thank you so much for sharing that, Bob. That absolutely, like, I can totally see that happening. And I think that Easton is an example of that phenomenon that it has been happening in many other cities. Why do you think that people, although initially they wanted to invest, then eventually like they were detracted from continue doing it?
You mean the tenants or the landlords?
The landlords.
It's hard to pin it down, I think, to one particular reason, but you know, I think it depends on how they approach their rental property. Some landlords took great property in the property and kept it up. Others saw it mostly as a cash cow and didn't want to reinvest, particularly if the neighborhood began to show signs of declining. So they were probably less inclined to invest the money in if they thought, you know, they'd get their money's worth out, but it was going in the wrong direction. There's a variety of factors that come into play with that.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen so you guys can see the notes, and then we'll keep the conversation going. Okay.
Can you explain, can you hear me?
Go ahead. Yes, Laura.
How does the deconversion grant program work exactly? Like, how are the landlords incentivized to sell the properties to the renters, or how does that work?
So I think that we would have to look at examples of other cities where there have been successful, where an attempt like this has been successful. At this moment, I don't have one like an example ready to tell you how it would work. So let me make a note to myself so I can get back to you on that, Laura. Okay.
Okay, but there are examples out there of other places that have done that.
I think
I
Amy
wanted
may be able to shed a little light on this from the local perspective.
Okay, cool.
So how they've worked in the past is if you purchased a property that you intended to live in, you could apply to the city for some grant dollars. So it would allow you to, for instance, remove a second kitchen or a third kitchen that was in a house, perhaps fix bathroom situations, that sort of thing. So take down walls so it became one unit again, as opposed to chopped up into multiple apartments. They were, from what I understand, small grants, I want to say are somewhere around $5,000. So I don't know that they fulfilled the entire process, the entire bill for that process, unfortunately. I think trying to find better versions of this, though, would be really helpful, and how we can make it really appealing to people, because property costs are really high, and they're very high for investment properties. So if you want to buy buy a property and deconvert it from 2 units to 1 unit, you're probably paying more than a single family home to begin with, because it's marketed as an investment property. So, and then to have to do additional work on top of that to remove a second kitchen or take down walls, and unsplit up a property, it starts to get really expensive. So I think if we can find better opportunities for that, Bob, I know you'll talk about rent to own opportunities too, I think, which could be perhaps part of this as well.
Yeah, no, thank you, Amy. That's a good segue. Yeah, in fact, there was a good example of a well-run sort of rent-to-own operation that Jeff Porter's Pub, implemented in a lot of the more modest sections of the West Ward at one point. He was fortunate that at the time he was doing that kind of work, there were a number of modest row homes on a lot of the alleyways of the West Ward, again, like Spruce Street and Pine Street. And he was able to buy those at sheriff's sale for a really low price. I don't know if we can replicate those prices in today's housing market, but again, to use that example, buying it at a reasonable price, he then would sink $25,000 or $35,000 into each home. He would upgrade things like the furnace, maybe the kitchen, the bathroom, that sort of thing, give it all a nice coat of paint. And then he would find a family that had never owned a home, but would like to have owned a home, but were leery of going through the process of getting a mortgage, dealing with banks and the like. So he would connect that family with his operation. He would make it clear in their lease that a portion of their rent every month would go into an escrow account. And that would be held until there would be enough money in the escrow account to pay for closing costs and down payments. He would then connect that family with a mortgage company that he worked with. They didn't have to deal with the banks or the unfamiliarity of dealing with financial institutions. It was all sort of handed up to them in terms of his mortgage company. The mortgage company would then make it possible for that family to close on the house. And in a sense, they would convert from a rental property to home ownership. But the important element is Jeff was doing this for families that wanted a home, never owned a home, didn't know how to navigate in the home purchasing market, had lesser means in terms of their own personal wealth. And he made it affordable by going through that rent to own process. And he didn't want to be a long-term landlord anyway. He was, good to he was happy to get a family to rent in the short term, but long-term, he would have preferred to sell it to them and to have them own it. The benefits were that it gave that family of lesser means an opportunity to build home equity for future needs in the family. It stabilized those blocks because now you had home ownership, and the family you wanted to protect their investments, so they cared maybe a little more about the upkeep of the property and how other properties in that neighborhood looked. And you created probably a more stable, safe neighborhood through the home ownership effort. And the important thing is you took people of modest means and gave them a chance at building home equity, which in America is one of the ways to get some financial stability underneath you. So I think that really should be a component part of deconversion. And I even like that approach more than the kind of grants that used to exist in various deconversion programs, because it really was targeted towards people of lesser means to make the housing affordable and to transition it from rental to home ownership through the rent to own or lease to own process. The deconversion grants are a good idea, but depending upon how you structure them, they could actually accelerate gentrification. So you have to be kind of careful, I think, if one of your aims is to make sure you're targeting families of lesser means for the opportunity to get affordable housing.
Just a follow-up question with that. Was there any stipulation tied to the new homeowner that they had to, or they weren't able to sell their home over a certain price for a number of years? Or were they able to potentially just flip it a year or two if they wanted to?
Yeah, I don't believe Jeff built that into any kind of agreement. That's something to consider. But in the case of the kind of families that Jeff was trying to help, this was their first home. They had never owned a home. And so they're anxious to have that kind of equity, that kind of home. And yeah, they may down the road consider flipping, but I think that was probably rare given the kind of families that he zeroed in on. That's a consideration though, if you're designing a program. I'm currently trying to work on legislation to get PHFA, or Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency, to adopt a similar program. But as you can well imagine, putting that into the legalese of a bill can be rather daunting. And the first draft just was too mechanical and lacked some of the vision and incentive that Jeff utilized in putting in place his program. But I think it's a marvelous model to follow. The only caveat in all that is that it's going to probably be tougher and tougher to find those sheriff sale homes, those homes of modest means, because the market is just so hot. But there's plenty of modest housing, which perhaps if we approach landlords and say, hey, you've got tenants, can you get you involved in this idea to lease to own?
Thank you. That's very, very, very educational from an outsider perspective. And another thing that I find very remarkable is that this was a private initiative. Like, this was run by a private business owner, like from the neighborhood, right?
Yeah, who didn't want to necessarily be a landlord for the rest of his life. He just wanted to get his investment back and help a family that was looking to get a home.
Nice. Amy, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to piggyback on a Jeff Porter example. Actually, in my block, down at the other end of my block, he had a property that was a 2-unit that he worked with a woman to do a rent to own situation. And then that woman, after she purchased the home, I'm not sure how long ago, but then she worked with the city to deconvert the property. So now it's a single family that she owns, which is, I think there's also something to be said for people who live in, an owner occupied unit that perhaps has another living unit within. And I think we might have touched upon this as well, especially with multi-generational housing, especially like you see in a Hispanic community where moms and aunts and other members of the immediate family live. So it could provide an opportunity for them to have their own space, but still have an owner-occupied situation. So there's more care towards those homes as well.
I think that's a very good point, Amy. In fact, it probably gives the person who owns the home but still has the rental property upstairs an even stronger case to build up equity and to cover the cost of their mortgage. One of the great aspects of that sort of auxiliary housing that you can rent out to family members or people that you'll keep an eye on because you're living downstairs is that it can subsidize your mortgage. So it makes the affordability of transitioning from a purely rental property into a rent-to-own property. And I think there was a program I recall reading about years ago. It was sort of a nonprofit church-based program called the Nehemiah Project. I don't know if you're familiar with it or anyone is, but I think it occurred in one of the boroughs of New York, perhaps Brooklyn. And they actually built housing with the intent that it would be, the first floor would be owned by the person who owns the building, would have to live in it for a period of time. And they would rent out the upper units and subsidize their own mortgage by having those rental properties above them. So it's a nice model.
I am writing it down so we can look it up after this call. Niyama, did you say?
Nehemiah, it's a biblical name of some sort.
Thank you very much.
I'm not as well versed in the verses as the Bible as I probably should be. But
Thank you. Anyone else wants to weigh in this topic? We are talking about expanding the deconversion grant program or additional or programs similar that would lead to transforming current rental units into owner units. The second preferred choice was home improvement grants, whether if they are through a contest or if they are run as an award program. Everyone who chose this option, do you want to share why? We were talking about landlords that they did not continue to upkeep their properties, and that has resulted in a neighborhood decline. So do you guys think that perhaps this type of home improvement grants would help, even if they are for rental units, or do you want this program to be exclusive for homeowners? What are your ideas around it? Amy? You're on mute.
Sorry, I thought I clicked that. I know initial thoughts from our design committee were that we wanted to focus on home ownership, and one way to incentivize home ownership in the neighborhood was with grants like this. Personally, I feel like some landlords would take advantage of this and either do the work and then jump the price, or you're kind of paying to have a business. I don't know, it didn't feel like what we were trying to accomplish. Although we want the neighborhood to be better, I do feel like a business owner should be, part of their responsibility is the upkeep of their business, which is their rental property. So I definitely feel like first and foremost, we should look at homeowners and this as an incentive for home ownership in the neighborhood. We did during COVID complete some design guidelines so that we can help keep that historic nature of the neighborhood, and we have something to fall back on. That was one of the difficult pieces of starting a grant program, is that within the downtown we have a historic district, and they're kind of the arbiters of taste, and they need to put their stamp of approval on work that's being done. So when a grant application comes into downtown, it's already been approved and fits within the fabric of the ward. So with the creation, when people put applications in, we can at least rank them as to how well and how closely they follow our design guidelines and the historic nature of the properties. Because I think that is part of the fabric and part of the reason the neighborhood has been met with so much decline, as Bob will say, the three salesmen of aluminum siding and drop ceilings, and I forget the third one, Bob, that came through the
Shag carpeting.
shag carpeting. Okay, we're not dealing with the interiors here, but that came through that neighborhood, really did a disservice to that architecture. And I think that that's part of the reason that that neighborhood is in the state that it's in. So trying to bring back.
It's lost some of its character. Yeah. No, you're right. It lost some of its character. And to Amy's point earlier too, I think, a lot of people, when they are able to amass enough capital to do the down payment, to do the closing costs, they often find themselves in a home that needs work that they no longer have any money to be able to fix. And because they just bought it, they don't have the equity. So that might be a good focus for the home improvement grants. Those people who are of modest means, they bought the house, they probably, used every bit of available capital they had to get it. And they would like to work on it, but now, hey, I don't have the equity or the capital to be able to do the improvements. I think that's maybe a missing piece in supporting people of modest or just barely into the middle class income bracket and helping them along the way.
Are there stipulations that people can buy houses and then have, I think that this one is really hard to do for the reasons that that you guys have already brought up, but I wondered if, part of the stipulation of the grant would be that you live in your house for whatever period or whatever,
Yeah.
because that would, people do that with college, college tuition reimbursement programs and such too.
Yeah, you could build that in. And if you leave before a certain period of time, you have to pay back some portion of what was given to you as a grant.
Adam, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, looking at the statistics of the neighborhood, I think we all know that it's weighted a little bit more heavily towards renters than homeowners. There's about 60% renter households and about 40% homeowner households. But even if we just target the homeowners, that's still about 1,400 households within the West Ward. And I'm sure there's probably a good proportion of those 1,400 households that could use some TLC and home improvement. So it may not capture everybody, but it could make a big difference, especially knowing that home ownership, it tends to kind of cluster in different pockets of the neighborhood as well.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you so much for pointing that out. I am gonna write it on the notes. Anyone else has any comments or additional comments about home improvement grants? Okay. The final top ranked housing related strategy was the initial housing investment at the North Union apartments and at the Bushkill House. Why did you guys choose that one? So you guys remember that as part of this plan, we are talking about the potential sites where, the sites where we are going to start the redevelopment are going to be the apartments at North Union and at the Bushkill House. So we are when we are talking about redevelopment, we are talking about the sites are going to go through a complete renovation. We are required by the federal government that all of the units get replaced one-to-one. And in addition, we are looking at changing the configuration of what the apartments look like right now. So we are looking to include mixed income housing in addition to the existing number of units that they are already assisted or low income in the area. And additionally, we want to add opportunities for businesses to take over some storefronts. We want to add opportunities for a park space in the new configuration. So that's usually what the housing investment is going to cover. Do you guys want to talk about other things that you would like to see, or why did you choose this as your priority? Yes, Bob?
Sorry, I don't mean to monopolize, but a thought came to mind that I think, as Amy said in the chat room, both the Union Street Bushkill House and the Elm Street are of equal importance. I think it was tough to choose between the two. The one thing that makes Union Street Apartments, and in particular the Bushkill House, or I'm sorry, the Union Street Apartments, is its visibility. You know, it's sort of the gateway to the West Ward from the downtown. And to stabilize that, to improve on it, I think is beneficial to the whole West Ward. And most importantly, to the people who live there. You know, they've lived in housing which looks like public housing. And it'd be nice to be able to live in housing that looks like pretty much the rest of a middle class or working class neighborhood. And to have the added benefit of the mixed use, which will gain stability and access to various goods and services that make for a complete neighborhood. So in many respects, the Union Street Apartments, I think, are a way of putting a fresh face on affordable housing in the West Ward that will benefit the image, but also, and most importantly, the lives of the people who will live in them.
Absolutely.
I have a question, and it probably has been addressed before, but it just kind of made me think as Bob was talking. What happens to the residents that are living there now during this reconstruction, redevelopment period? I remember the issues going back to Hope 6 on the south side, where people moved out. Some of them moved out of state. Quite a few came into the West Ward. Some headed down 6. Does the plan cover that? I think there were also some vouchers that were involved if people had to move. And then if they got back in, I know they had to go through a process to get back in, but I'm just curious, is this part of the plan that will be developed?
Yeah, so I can jump in on this, and Amy, you may want to elaborate, but we part of the transformation plan will be an overall relocation strategy and a phasing plan, because we're actually looking at options where we could potentially begin to build new housing without having to knock down any of the existing housing. And then you could shift people, whether it's across the street or a couple blocks away. So we're going to explore different options for the phasing. We want to learn from I guess the challenges of Hope 6, knowing that not as many families were able to come back to the Neston Heights as were initially, hoped to. Sometimes people take a voucher, they end up in another neighborhood, they kind of live there, they're happy there, they continue on, and then they don't want to come back, or there's other reasons, as you mentioned, people moving out of state and such. Our goal is really to ensure that all of the families that are in good standing have the first right to come back to any new redeveloped housing through this project. So it's going to be part of the bigger transformation plan and the housing strategy as we move forward. But that's a great point to bring up, Paul, and something we need to continue to reiterate, especially as when we're speaking with residents at any of the sites.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. And thanks for the question, Paul. Yes, David?
Adam? Oh,
Yes.
if people leave and then come back, how does that affect their rents?
It shouldn't affect their rent. The rent is based on their income. So unless they gained additional income in the years that they left, then it wouldn't, it's just based on a sliding scale based on their income at the time. I think it gets refreshed every year.
Yes.
I mean, ultimately, you do want people to be moving up and out of public housing and kind of transitioning into market rate. So we're also looking to potentially build in some homeownership opportunities on particularly the Elm Street site. We think there could be some opportunity there. So there could be a program where some of the current renters are able to move into an actual single family home or a townhouse that's for sale right on the same property. So that's something that we'd like to foster as well.
Correct. Thanks, Adam. Great. Anyone has additional or final comments about the importance of redeveloping these sites? Great. I think that we can all agree that they are primary. They are very important as part of the neighborhood, and any change that comes to them will definitely reflect on or will be replicated, will have a ripple effect on everything around them. So I'm happy that all of us can agree on the importance of the renovation of the sites. So why don't we keep moving along, and we go to the second question of the survey, where we are going to rank the opportunities related to business. And it looks like you guys already took the survey. But for anyone else who has not yet taken this question, I'm gonna give you guys a couple minutes to review the priorities. The options are regarding commercial strategies. The options are focused funding and incentives for small businesses, storefront improvement programs and technical assistance, inventory of potential commercial spaces, creating an inventory of potential commercial spaces, like for example, places that are readily available for starting businesses, or places that could need just a little bit of improvement right before they are ready to be available for lease. Establishing or recruiting a CDFI to come to the neighborhood. Community Development Financial Institution is a community-based lender or a lender, nonprofit that loans money to loans money locally. Yes. Small business training, establishing and promoting live and work spaces. Having a business incubator space on Northampton Street, and streamlining the process for food trucks or food-related businesses. So I'm going to give you guys a couple minutes to read through the priorities. And if you have not submitted your answers, take a moment to order them according to your preference. And we will continue the conversation in a couple minutes, okay?
Oh. Adam, the link you sent is all dealing with the housing side, not the business side. Is there another link?
I think if you click it, it should go to the next slide. Or if you hit submit, it'll go to the next slide for you.
Oh, just hit submit?
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. It says I haven't made a choice.
Right, mine says the same thing.
Let me
Yeah, it's
check.
still housing.
I'll do this myself.
Now I got it.
Yeah, just press OK when it says you haven't made a choice, and it'll take you to
Right.
the next slide.
Okay,
Sorry about that.
no problem.
Thanks for letting us know, though.
Okay. Hmm.
Okay, how are you guys feeling? Did you have enough time, or do you need one more minute, couple more minutes?
There we go.
Oh, I didn't mean to rush you guys. Thanks everyone for participating. Thank you so much for submitting your answers. I am very excited to see this board because it really looks like all of your priorities are like very on point. So the top ranked strategies regarding commercial development are storefront improvement program and technical assistance, focused funding or incentives for small businesses, and establishing and recruiting a DFI. So give me 1 second while I make this note really quick. And meanwhile, anyone wants to comment, why did you choose these options? So the options were storefront improvement program and technical assistance, focused funding or incentives for small businesses, and recruiting a CDFI. So every time I drive on Northampton, I always get the impression that the businesses that are on it are like very specific to the neighborhood. And I wonder, how do you guys feel about Northampton, for example, as a business corridor?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is neighborhood oriented. There are still some that reach beyond the neighborhood, but many of them have disappeared. There were dry cleaners and various other service industries that reached beyond the neighborhood. And there are others that really have I think of the one meat processing place. Is it R&B? That's a good example of compatibility of a manufacturing use within a neighborhood that's not intrusive, but employs people and has a good clientele that reaches beyond the neighborhood as far as who they sell to.
What's his name?
Amy, do you recall, is it R&B provisions? Oh, R&R provisions, I'm sorry. Thank you, Amy. R&R provisions. It's located between 12th and 13th Street on Northampton.
Right.
It's been there for many, many years. It processes meat products and sells them to a broad range of customers, but it also employs people. And I think one of the elements that I personally, and it has a retail component too. Thank you, Amy. That's true. One of the elements that I think would be good for the West Ward is to have those kind of multifaceted businesses that are part retail and part manufacturing, so that you broaden the base of potential employment to people living in the West Ward. At one time, when I was a kid growing up in the West Ward, there were a lot of small scale manufacturing entities. A lot of them were based on textiles and clothing manufacturing. There were a couple of places that were tucked away in the little alleyways of the West Ward, and they employed anywhere from 50 to 100 people. And many of them lived in the West Ward. So it was a great opportunity for people who were resident to have their employment only a few blocks away from their home that they could walk to. I've become very fond of the idea of a multifaceted small industrial operation where there is a retail component, where you can actually go into a store and purchase what is manufactured there to expand the variety of offerings within the neighborhood, but then also have the manufacturing process in the back half of the building. And that could be anything from like an R&R meat processing place, or even something that manufactures perhaps furniture, where they have a display room in the front to sell retail furniture, but they have a broader audience or market from what they manufacture in the back. I think there's a great possibility or a great opportunity for craft-based manufacturing of a light industrial nature within the West Ward that really would help to spur employment within the West Ward for people who live there, but also have a retail component that reaches beyond the neighborhood, but also would serve the neighborhood's needs.
But isn't it, Bob, isn't it an issue of available land to do that? I mean, R&R takes up a pretty good chunk of real estate.
They do, but they're not huge. And, you know, at one time, like I said, there was those kind of manufacturing entities. It all depends on the scale of it too. You know, you might be able to encourage someone to come in to occupy an old industrial site. And that might not be where they end up at the end of a very prosperous business, but it's a good starting place, getting back to that incubator concept. And as Amy points out in the chat room, you have Kaplan's. You know, they moved from downtown where they were established for many years, and they occupied the Ayler Electric building on 13th and Spruce Street, and have a very successful business that markets beyond the West Ward. But, you know, it is a place that can also offer employment within the West Ward. But I really like that idea of a sort of multi-purpose light industrial, where you're manufacturing something in the back, you sell it to a broad market, but you're hiring people locally in the neighborhood, and you have a retail component in the front that can sell to the people who are residents, but also people who might be traveling through along the Northampton Street corridor. I think that adds stability and economic diversity to a neighborhood.
I love that idea. I am here for all of these ideas. Thank you.
I'd actually love to hear from Louis a little bit about technical assistance strategies for local businesses, and what do you think might be most needed for with knowing the West Ward community?
Well, I don't know the West Ward community very well, but what I'm thinking as you guys were talking is, don't lose sight of the needs of the community in terms of products and services. The Lehigh Valley is a very, I don't know how to say it. There are a lot of options for businesses in the Lehigh Valley. Ones that succeed are the ones that are fulfilling a need primarily within the valley. Now, there are exceptions, you know, we've got Mack trucks and those guys, but we're not going to bring a Mack trucks to Easton or to the West Ward. So part of it's got to be market driven. When we work with a client who has an idea, well, every client has an idea, and we have them look out for the next 5 years. And I literally asked the question. In fact, we have an exercise that they can do. What does your business look like 5 years from now? So they have to think about a lot of things. What are the needs of the folks who live in the West Ward? We talked a little bit about retail, but you know, there needs to be, it would be very nice if there were a local grocery store, a local market, car repair, all of those kinds of things. Something on an industrial scale, I don't know. If it relates to technology where it doesn't require a lot of space and it's kind of leading edge, and the property values are very good, then you can attract some small businesses in there, or attract a resident or somebody local to start a business. Again, I'm not that familiar with the West Ward. I don't know if there are some tear downs that need to happen, just because whether it's an office or a small factory or even a home, that the West Ward would be better off if that's taken down and replaced, as opposed to trying to rehabilitate the same building owner after owner. So I know that's kind of rambling, but it's the best I can do right now. And I lost I was unable to see the line items in vote. So that would have helped if I didn't lose that, but I did.
Thanks for your valuable input, Luis. That's very, very, very on point. I see Laura, you have your hand up.
Yes, I wanted to just second like that, something that would be for manufacturing and also have retail makes so much sense for the neighborhood. I think, you know, if we do want to think about that, the pricing though is very difficult out there, at least up until like 15th Street, you know, Westward proper. Just, you know, for the couple past months, I've been trying to look for a space for a business. And I also hooked up with this man who has a lot of experience in the brewing world, and he's been looking to open a production brewery in the Lehigh Valley. And I've been poking around the West Ward, but you know, anything that there's nothing like warehouse pricing out there that I can really find. And there is a lot of lack of like, and a lot of the buildings are now, you know, full or are owned and are just selling for pricier than what it would make for manufacturing. But I mean, if there's like any initiatives or things that could be created to make that a thing, I think that would be great.
Local banks should have a say as well, because typically a business owner, a new business owner, or someone who's going to purchase land, or someone who's going to purchase an existing business, typically there's a bank involved, and the banks know everything that's going on in a particular area. And there are a number of very large and a few small banks in Easton. And that would be a good question to ask someone who's in the banking industry. What are the things you would invest in? And by invest, I mean grant a loan to an owner operator. And what are the things that you would stay away from? The other thing that comes to mind is, I know it's a diverse community, but I don't really know what the demographics are. In terms of ethnicity and language and so forth. So that's another thing. Is there an underserved Hispanic community there? Then you would want to serve the Hispanic community. Is there an underserved, I don't know, Asian American community? Then you want to serve those. So it's a lot more complicated than saying, well, we should have some combination of retail and wholesale or manufacturing. Is
And to
the
Lewis's point too,
go ahead.
Yes,
just going
sorry.
to say to Lewis's point, as far as getting banks involved, I think that's a great point because they have community investment obligations. And the West Ward would definitely be a target audience because of the need for economic development.
Thank you. Thank you, both of you guys, for your valuable input. And also thanks, Laura, for sharing your experience. Anyone else has additional thoughts about technical assistance, education, and storefront improvement programs? So perhaps more than storefront improvement, we're talking about finding spaces or finding appropriate spaces. I don't know.
I mean, one of the great things about an old neighborhood is that it typically has a variety of buildings. And because they were built in a period of time that was more solid and more substantial, they lend themselves rather well to adaptive reuse. I mean, we've seen that with the Silk Mill complex on 13th Street, where what was once a silk mill is now housing as well as retail. It really has lent itself to some really good adaptive reuse. And there have been little cases of that in the West Ward. There was a building on Butler Street, I think between 11th and 10th. It used to be the 7th Ward Democratic Club. Well, now it's a business. I'm not sure if they manufacture or retail, but it's fully occupied and operational. So there are those little gems tucked away in various parts of the West Ward that could lend themselves to adaptive reuse.
Are there any in particular that you all see as being good candidates? I know I always look at the Armory building as a real gem and a place that could really be activated, but are there other locations in the West Ward that you think are maybe hidden gems that could be brought back to life?
Yeah, I think it gets to the point about the need for maybe an inventory of what's out there and how flexible it would be for whatever particular business you were starting, whether it was retail, light manufacturing, or a combination of retail and light manufacturing. So certain corridors come to mind, and an inventory would probably be able to establish this. But the Butler Street corridor, the Northampton Street corridor, are both major roads with some commercial and light manufacturing kind of potential along those corridors.
Great, thank you for pointing that out. I want to read a question on the chat. Are you guys aware of any significant dedicated maker spaces in Easton? We talked about one in the arts and culture meeting last month. There's a studio, I think that it's off of Elm Street, art studio. I think that's its name, isn't it?
There's an art studio at like 1120 Butler Street. I think it's 1120. Mm-hmm. It's a big warehouse and it's been converted into art studios. And there's a bunch of artists that work in there. I think that's like the biggest maker space out there. I know there is a downtown company, Mercantile. They have a little store and they're crafters and they rent a space out in the West Ward to do their stuff. It's a smaller, it's probably about 2,000 square feet, but that's sort of another space where stuff is made.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Great. Can we move to the second item on this list? Oh, we have 9 minutes left on this meeting, and two more priorities in commercial strategies. What about funding and incentives for small businesses? We kind of touched up a little bit. on it when we talked about the CDFI and bringing a lender into the neighborhood, like a bank or a specialized business lender. So how do you guys see this focused funding or incentives for small businesses playing a role in the outcome of this plan? Yes, Amy?
This kind of goes hand in hand with number 3, but I think number 2 is important to put out there. Through the Mayor's Affordable Housing Task Force, we've recommended the creation of a CDFI specifically to help with housing within the city as a whole and kind of targeting West Ward. So a lot of the pieces of affordability and first-time home ownership, credit counseling, home repairs going beyond facades, but repairs in general, that CDFIs could work towards. And I think coupling that with small business incentives and funding would be really wonderful and kind of round out that ask to the city as we start to create the CDFI. And would be really important. It would, I think really take it to the next level if we had that additional piece to it here.
Absolutely.
Another element is access, parking or transportation for employees of the business. Presumably, some of the employees would be local and could walk to work, but there are others who will need to drive or some sort of public transportation and not have to walk long distances. It's a kind of a hilly area. They're just, maybe we should spend some time, not today, but in the study that you're doing, some time just addressing that particular one, because it's a very important part of really of any area. In terms of employment, in terms of access for customers and that sort of thing. If it's a manufacturing operation or a bakery or anything like that where the product gets shipped away, there again, you're going to need access to the buildings and not create a traffic jam, when there's a truck parked on the street. So there's a lot to it.
Absolutely, thank you. Transportation keeps being like one of the underlying themes among all of the meetings that we've been having this week. So absolutely, that is a priority. Anything else about small businesses, incentives, and focused funding? Yes, Amy, your hand's still up.
I think John Kingsley is going to have a lot of input to this. We've worked with John in finding space for mentoring pre-pandemic. I think I mentioned that already, but he's director of community and economic development. So he's been through this kind of situation many times before. He knows what people are looking for. He knows the kinds of businesses that work and don't work. What the talents that folks in Easton have as potential employees. There's a whole range of things.
Amy?
And environmental considerations would be another one.
Amy, back in the days of the West Warden Partnership, when CACLV was involved, in looking at the recruiting of CDFI, was Rising Tide, which is part of CACLV, were they ever involved? You were involved in the business aspect of that as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Were they ever really, did they show any interest in the West Ward?
Yes, I mean, that was part of our discussion from the Affordable Housing Task Force was about Rising Tide. When I worked through Main Street, they were always an option. I think interest rates got so low that them as a lender there wasn't that high of an incentive to work with them because they were actually higher than local banks at that time. As we've looked at this affordable housing piece and we we feel like we should be creating our own CDFI that is really rooted in Easton, because Rising Tide has not felt very connected to the city as a whole and more focused on the Allentown, Bethlehem area. So those were our recommendations, was to create an Easton-based one. And we have a banker that's been part of these discussions, and
Right.
Neil, and he has at least 2, if not 3 banks that would be interested in kind of coming together to create this.
Yeah, the only reason I was mentioning them is I was looking at some stuff with them not too long ago, and their focus appeared to be small businesses more than the housing piece. And that's the only reason I mentioned it.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we did something that was Easton based for them to, for them to do both housing and small business, it seems like that would be appropriate, since they would be really focused on the city as opposed to a larger, area like all of the Lehigh Valley. So I wonder if that could be an additional component for them and all working together.
Thanks, Amy, for answering the question. Yes, I strongly agree. Anything else regarding recruiting a CDFI? I think that the comments that you guys brought up on the prior topic regarding funding, I feel like they really overlap. So we have mostly covered everything. On our last 2 minutes of the allotted time to this meeting, I want to make sure that we covered everything, and that every
I think we might have lost Andrea right at the end.
Yeah.
She froze up on us. Well, I can do the wrap up here. So we're going to be taking all of these project ideas back, and at our 3rd meeting, which will be in March, we're going to really get down to details, even more so on these top ring strategies, where we'll be trying to identify partners and potential implementation resources. And obviously we've already started to do that through this meeting, but that will be really the focus of our 3rd working group meeting in March. So again, thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Paul, especially, for spending almost 4 hours with us today on 2 separate working
My
groups.
pleasure.
Time
flies when you're having fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So your input is invaluable to the success of the project going forward. So thanks again, and have a great rest of your week, and we will see you all very soon.
Thanks, Adam.
Thank you, Adam.
Thanks, Adam.